Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. We are celebrating Pride again. Last week I did a video recommending books with bisexual main characters, and today I'm going to do a video recommending in general my favourite queer literary fiction. Literary fiction is the area that I read the most from, and I feel like a lot of the time when I search for LGBTQIA+ book recommendations, they tend to be in the YA sphere or the romance sphere, which is great, but it's not my favourite area to read in. So, for anyone else like me, here are some queer literary fiction books I have absolutely loved. I will link to the Books by Characters video because obviously all of those apply for this video as well. So the videos work together to give you a whole list of recommendations. I also did a video for Book Break that was specifically about happy LGBTQIA+ stories where nobody dies, because I think that's really important. A lot of the books that I read, including a lot of the books I'm afraid on this list, and a lot of the books that get recommended in general that are LGBT stories, do tend to be sad. I think also a lot of the ones that get published do tend to be sad. People seem to think that LGBTQIA+ stories can only be tragic and people only want to read them if they're tragic, and that's a real shame. So I did a video celebrating happy queer stories and I will link to that below. But this is just a list of my genuine favourites, so a lot of them are quite sad, I'm afraid, because I just love sad books in general. So starting with maybe the saddest of the sad, the book A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This is quite a divisive book on BookTube, I didn't realise. It's very long and it's very sad, and a lot of people think it's just too much. Some people have described it as torture porn, which I don't agree with in my reading of it. It is very intense. A lot of horrible things do happen to our main character, Jude, but I thought the book was absolutely beautiful, and I thought that history, that possibly over the top, too many things to conceive of history, served to give the book this grounding. It was really about trauma and the way that trauma affects people and the way that some trauma can't be escaped from. Jude is going to carry this trauma for the rest of his life, and the book is very sad and doesn't try and make that any happier. But I actually did find the book hopeful because the title kind of sums it up. It's like amongst all these terrible things that he is carrying with him and the terrible struggles that he goes through, he does have this little life, and he might view it as a little life or not even value it at all, but actually it's this wonderful life, and he does have these wonderful relationships with a lot of characters in the book that even if he struggles to always see himself as being valued, he is incredibly valued, and he values those people as well. I'm being very rambly. I haven't actually got onto what this book is about. It's about a man called Jude who suffered extreme abuse when he was younger and continues to suffer abuse as he grows up. And it's about him and his three best friends, one in particular who he forms a relationship with. And it's also about an older couple who he forms a kind of adoptive parent relationship with. And it's about 800 pages long. And it's like, I was sold that this book was going to be 800 pages of pure misery. It's not 800 pages of pure misery. A lot of misery is packed into those 800 pages. But it is more than that. I found it really worthwhile and hopeful, if not in an explicitly hopeful way, and beautiful, but not everyone does. And there are a lot of trigger warnings, there's a lot of self-harm in this book, so it might not be for everyone, but I loved it. And then, funnily enough, the book that I read immediately after A Little Life, I found quite similar in some ways, but it's much less misery all packed into one go, even though it is a sad book still. It's called The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. So this is about, again, a friendship group of this time it's men and women in the friendship group, I think, or men and one woman maybe, who we see them in the past, in the 1980s, and as a lot of their friendship group, they have a very queer circle of friends, a lot of whom are affected by the AIDS crisis, and that's very sad. So we see them in the 80s in the past. We also see present day. Fiona, who was the one girl who was friends with these men, she's the younger sister of one of the men, we see her in the present missing these men that she used to be friends with, and also on her own journey to track down her daughter who's run away to Paris. I'm remembering a lot of this off the top of my head. It's been a few years and I haven't looked up anything to write notes about these books. So you're just getting my stream of consciousness, but I loved this book. I gave both A Little Life and this book 5 stars. The Great Believers, though, is sad more in a more manageable, sad book way. It's nowhere near the levels of extreme misery that you will find in A Little Life. So maybe if you want something slightly less intense, The Great Believers might be better for you. Okay, then there's Marriage of a Thousand Lies by S.J. Sindu. This is about two friends, a lesbian woman and a gay man, who get married as this kind of marriage of convenience because their families and their culture don't support them being gay. And so they have quite a good setup where they're both out and open to each other. They have this marriage that they can use to present to their families, but they're both free to do whatever they would like on their own time, which is great, and that's working really well for them. Until Lucky, who is our main character, who's the wife, finds out that her old best friend and ex-lover, a girl that she knew when she was growing up, is now also getting married. And she goes to see her, and the two of them have to confront the fact they are both living this lie and whether or not they're brave enough to step away from the lie and admit to each other and to the world that they want to be together. And it's about kind of confronting what they have to sacrifice to live this lie, but also what they would have to sacrifice to come out and be open and whether or not their families would accept them. So again, it's really sad. Actually, let me just check. Are all of these books sad on this list? No, I'm going to go to one now that makes me happy when I remember it. This is Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fannie Flagg. I love this book, I love this title. I have never watched the film because I've heard that in the film they make Ruth and Iggy, the main lesbian couple of this book, they make them just friends. Just friends who even like raise a child together. I mean, they're so obviously in a relationship. The book itself still isn't explicit, it's very much of its time, but it is still much clearer. There's no other way to interpret the book other than that this couple, Ruth and Iggy, are in love with each other, and that's wonderful. I don't know how loudly you can hear the lawnmower going right now, so sorry about that. What was I saying? The book is set in Alabama in the 30s at this cafe that Ruth and Iggy run together, the Whistle Stop Cafe, and it's about quite a big cast of characters who come into this cafe, and a lot of the book is actually about racism in that time and place. But it's also about this relationship between these two women. There's also a murder storyline, and it's a lot about food. You actually get recipes at the back of the book of some of the food that they serve in this cafe. I've never tried making any of them because they actually kind of sound like something I would hate, like fried green tomatoes. It's a lovely, whimsical name for a book, not something I want to eat. But yeah, it's a wonderful book. Going back to some sadness, For Today I Am a Boy by Kim Fu is about a Chinese-Canadian trans girl. We meet her when she's a girl all the way up to womanhood, but living in a family in which the fact that she is a girl would not be accepted, and so hence the title, For Today I Am a Boy. Her family see her throughout as a boy and then as a man, and it's about her journey to accept herself. We meet her through quite a lot of years, and it's quite interesting how, because of her struggle as a child where she so just thinks that she has to be a boy, she doesn't think there's any other option, as we meet her as time moves on, and then she meets other trans characters or gay characters who are open and proud, she almost really resents them and finds that really hard to deal with because she has been closeted for so long. There's a lot of things that are very hard to read in this book. For example, she is assigned the name Peter when she's born by her parents who view her as male, and she's actually referred to as Peter for most of the book until the end when she reveals the name that she's chosen for herself. And things like that are definitely hard to read. It's definitely a sad book that doesn't allow her to express herself for the majority of the book. It's also worth mentioning that the author is cisgender. I'm cisgender, so I cannot review this from an Own Voices perspective. When I read it, it felt like a very honest exploration of what that would be like, to be so trapped within a family that wouldn't accept you and struggling to express yourself that way. I don't know if that is what a trans reader would interpret if they thought that it was a good portrayal or not. I can't speak to that. I can just say that I really enjoyed the book. Now, I said at the beginning that I wasn't going to include YA books in here, but that was a lie. The next book is a YA book, and that's The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth. But I'm still going to include it in here. It was a book that I absolutely loved. I found it it had a lot of crossover appeal. It was a very literary YA novel. What does literary even mean? But it was very character driven, not plot driven, which is a lot of what I look for in books. So I loved this. I also thought the film was very, very good. It didn't have a particularly wide release over here, but it was very good. The film was quite interesting though, because it only adapted the second half of the book. And halfway through the book is when our main character, Cameron Post, is sent to a Christian conversion camp when her family discover that she's gay. And the film just covers her time at the conversion camp. And the film did a great job of that. what the book gives you is a whole half of the book before that happens. So at the halfway point when she's sent to this camp, it's devastating. It's so life-changing because we've seen her build this relationship with this girl who ultimately is the one who turns her in because she freaks out and thinks it's the only way to protect herself. So that's really sad and upsetting and heartbreaking. I really, really liked Cameron as a character, and it was also really interesting meeting a lot of the friends that she makes at this conversion camp. And I liked the fact that while the scenes at the camp are very upsetting, a lot of them are actually quite harrowing, Cameron doesn't, it doesn't work on Cameron, obviously, because it doesn't work as a technique, but while everything that she experiences there, all the adults who speak to her there are so trying to convince her that she is wrong to think of herself as gay and that's something that needs to be fixed, and that is really, really hard to resist. Actually, she does manage to resist it, and she has this group of friends there who all manage to resist it through their friendship with each other. So I really liked that in the book. Trumpet by Jackie Kay. This was a brilliant book. I actually read this years ago when I first started BookTube. BookTube? That's not how you pronounce that. BookTube. For the Banging Book Club. So that used to be a series that Lena Norms did with Hannah Witten and Lucy Moon. First it was a YouTube series, then they did a podcast, and one of the books they read together was Trumpet by Jackie Kay. So this is about a fictional, he doesn't exist in real life, but a fictional famous jazz musician who dies right at the beginning or just before the book starts and is revealed from the autopsy to be a trans man. He was very famous as a man, and the fact that he was trans was not known even to his own son. I think his wife was one of the only people who knew. And it's about his son coming to terms with this. At first, really, really struggles with it. And in fact, I think his son is the one who then outs this fact to the press out of anger, but slowly kind of coming to realise and accept his father for who he was. It's about the relationship that this musician had with his wife. It's really about family love. I think that's like a lot of what the book is about, but it's also about identity and public versus private identity and what the world wants to know and feels like they have a right to know about this man. Yeah, it's a book that like really, really makes you think. It's not a big plot novel. Then we have Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I love this one so much. So Madeline Miller is the author of Circe. Song of Achilles was her first novel, I believe. And I absolutely love. I love both Circe and Song of Achilles. But Song of Achilles is about the love story between Achilles and Patroclus. And I had a strange experience with this book because I read it first, absolutely loved it, and then immediately the next book I read was Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, which is also a very, very good book, but paints Achilles in a much more brutal, horrible light. And that was quite like jarring after just having read Song of Achilles, where you like love him and his relationship with Patroclus. To be honest, I didn't love Achilles in Song of Achilles. I just loved Patroclus. But because Patroclus loves him, you kind of love him vicariously through that, and he is a much softer character in this book than in Pat Barker's book. And then finally, the last book I'm going to recommend is probably my favourite book I've read so far this year, and that is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. So this is the book that won the Booker Prize, joint with The Handmaid's Tale. No, not The Handmaid's Tale, with The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. I'm also really crossing my fingers that it's going to win the Women's Fiction Prize. It's just the most incredible book. So this is about 12 overlapping lives, mostly women, mostly black. And at first you don't always see how their lives come together. It's kind of like a collection of short stories, but as you read on, their lives are all interconnected, and you can actually, I wonder if I can find it, someone showed me a picture someone had drawn of like a whole family tree map of all the connections between the characters, and it was quite wonderful. And there are a lot of gay characters, there are a lot of lesbian characters, there is a non-binary character. It is a very queer novel, which I loved. But it's also really about the experience of being black and British. Not that I know what that experience is like, but I found it a very interesting read from that perspective. And also a very, very relatable read, which was interesting. Like, a lot of the characters I really, really found that I could relate to, even while they were talking about race, and I couldn't specifically relate to their experience of being black in this country. That's not something I've ever experienced or had to deal with. I thought it was brilliant. It was such a moving book. It's quite big, and I read it really quickly. So there you go, there's a bunch of recommendations, and like I said, I will also link below to my video about books with bi characters and my book break video about happy LGBTQIA plus stories. So loads of recommendations for you guys to choose from, and please do give me your own recommendations. I am always looking for more queer stories, particularly in literary fiction. And I also think this has been a really monumental Pride Month. It's been very interesting and relevant. The protests that have been happening, particularly in the States, but worldwide, against police brutality against Black people. And I think it's really important for us celebrating our LGBT history to know that so much of our history actually really intersects with Black history, and that we wouldn't have Pride now if it wasn't for a protest led by Black trans women. I think it's really important that we don't forget that while we're celebrating Pride, and don't feel like Pride is this separate, joyful thing. We've got to know that it started as a riot, it started as a protest, and that we owe so much to the Black women of history that it's really, really important that we stand by them now. I will link below to some videos that I've been watching of people talking much more eloquently about this than I can, and who know a lot more about the history. But yeah, I really encourage you to watch them and really think about that while we're celebrating Pride. I think it's important to remember where this all came from. But with that, I do hope that you have had a good Pride Month, and that wherever you are in your life or your journey, that you do feel safe and able to be proud, even if you're not out yet, to be proud within yourself. And anyone is always free, always welcome to reach out to me if you would like to talk about anything. My DMs on Instagram are open, so I'm always here to listen and help if I can. And I will see you guys soon.